Hello YTPC, YouTube, how you all doing? Well, this evening I have the wonderful topic of a winter ghost story. And this video will be about firstly the writer Sheridan Le Fanu, who was an Irish writer in about the 1840s, and he wrote a ghost story called Schalcken The Painter. And the other aspect I will discuss is Schalcken himself, because he was a real Dutch master, third generation from the fine Schilder painters of Holland, and much of the story is entwined with history and the truth and other things which were perhaps fictitious. I say perhaps. And the great curiosity is that Schalcken was very little known by the time that Le Fanu had written this story, and there are other Dutch masters like Vermeer or Rembrandt, or Van Dyck, who you probably remember much more easily. But there was a second layer of very, very fine painters who, depending on the decade we're talking about, were forgotten, then rediscovered, then forgotten. So I found it very intriguing that he'd written this story. Well, first, of course, housekeeping. This is a new pipe. This is my Peterson Basil Rathbone Sherlock Holmes pipe, with a silver clasp, and as usual the lovely stamp here of Sherlock Holmes, and it's in the rustic finish, and I tried it up already yesterday and it's excellent. It's a P-lip and 9mm, and to celebrate this slightly spooky episode of Redcoat's Return videos, I'm getting deeper into the tin of Scarecrow. There's maybe a third of it left now, but really good tobacco. And you may have noticed a half glass of sherry here, just to keep me refreshed during this story. So Sheridan Le Fanu, now there will be lots of links below about Schalcken and collections of his paintings, and where I got this wonderful book, which I will show you shortly, and where I got this DVD about Schalcken the Painter, and all of those things. So do look in the bucket for references. And Wiki covers Sheridan Le Fanu, who was born about 1815 and died 1873 from a heart attack, apparently. He was only 58. And he was quite well known as a Gothic horror writer, but his stories were something different. They were the so-called indirect horror story. In other words, you were never quite sure what it was and what was going on until quite far into the story, and there were twists and turns and fantastic detail. Some of you may know him from his work Carmilla, who was a vampire, a vampiress, I should say. And there were a few others that were quite well known. He was admired by M.R. James, who thought he really, particularly with Schalcken The Painter, had written a kind of masterpiece. So Gottfried Schalcken was born in 1643 and he died in 1706 at the age of 63. And he was basically learning to paint already at the age of 13 in Dordrecht. Dordrecht is not far from Rotterdam or The Hague. So he was already, as a young teenager, a student of Hoogstraten. Hoogstraten was one of these second generation Feinschilders. The Feinschilders are the detailed paintings. So if you think of the Dutch masters, it's all controlling incredible detail, but also light, the light and the shadows. And they were just absolute masters of that. And he actually then went to Leiden to study under Gerrit Douw. Gerrit Douw was one of these second generation masters, and he was very famous, and still his paintings today are at least as well known as Schalcken's, perhaps more so. And he studied under Rembrandt. So he was a great teacher, and you saw in a lot of Schalcken's early work that he was greatly influenced by Gerrit Douw, and partly the other way round when we come to the so-called candlelight paintings, which were the fame of Gottfried Schalcken. Now, Schalcken studied under Gerrit Douw, but slowly was known for his own work, and he actually got quite famous in the European circuit, and he went to London and he did a great number of commissioned portraits, even for William III of Orange. So I'll talk about that more when I show you this wonderful book that I bought with a collection of all of his fantastic paintings. So let me show you some of the wonderful paintings in the book. And I was looking for a book of Schalcken's works for a long time, and I found this, and it's absolutely a masterpiece. It's very, very well researched. There's a link below. It's in German. There might possibly be English translations, I don't know. And it's full of all of his paintings, but also his history in great detail. And the author and the collator and author was Dr. Anja Sevcik, and she has done absolutely a fantastic job, and I've actually been in contact with her to fill in some curious details which I wasn't able to extract from the book, as detailed and fantastic as it is. And there are other experts who have written chapters on his portraits or on his biblical paintings or ones of Greek mythology. So each section of his art has been looked by an appropriate expert, and it's absolutely wonderful. And of course there's a whole chapter on his candlelight painting. Without any doubt, he is best known for these kind of paintings. This particular one is in a gallery in England, in Leamington Spa, and must be about one of the most valuable of his paintings. Some of them are worth even near to $500,000. So even today, collectors are really looking for his wonderful art. So we know a fair amount of history about Schalcken, not every detail, but all of the facts that I've mentioned, and the fact that he was later married with Francoise van Diemen in October 1679. All of these details appeared in Sheridan Le Fanu's ghost story. So he had researched it extraordinarily well, and he had woven it with 80% fact and that wonderful 20% fantasy that he had thrown into it. He had Schalcken a very good marriage and had 7 children with Francoise van Diemen. Unfortunately, all but one died in infancy, as was the problem in those days, that child mortality was so high, and it was almost extraordinary if 2 or 3 children lived on in a family. And of course medicine was at its infancy in those days. Let me show you actually a photo of Sheridan Le Fanu. Now there are several paintings which I found really fascinating, as well as the one in the thumbnail, that he did this wonderful painting of William of Orange, who succeeded James II, of course, and holding a candle. So that's what they wanted him for, candlelight paintings, and like this one here. And there's a later one of, there's maybe 10 or 15 self-portraits, and they're all beautifully presented in the book. But there's one of him holding a medal, very large gold medal, and that was given to him as payment for several of his paintings by Johann Wilhelm. He was the Elector Palatine in the days when the Pfalz region, not far from Mannheim today, was still part of the Holy Roman Empire, and he was the Elector Palatine, and he ruled that small kingdom that was in what Germany is today. But then you have to realize that it was very much not one state back in those days. And that medal was worth about 500 guilders. That's an estimate. Nobody really knows, but they've estimated the size, and based on gold today that would be $50,000. So, and it was said even then that's about the year salary of a priest, for example. So he was financially very, very successful. And what I find quite fascinating about that particular painting, this one here, is that that was done in 1706 and dated and signed by Schalcken, and in that very same year, in November 13th, 1706, he died at the age of 63. And unfortunately, we don't know why he died, whether it was an accident or a disease or something untoward like that, and we don't know where he is buried. At least that's something I haven't found out. Some of the Dutch masters, for example, Vermeer, have their graves even marked today. So that's a bit about Sheridan Le Fanu, and that's a bit about Gottfried Schalcken. You can look in the wiki links that I've put below to see a bit more detail. It would take me hours to really do any kind of justice to the life and times of both these gentlemen, but it gives you a little bit of a feeling. Let's talk now about a BBC production in 1979 called Schalcken The Painter. Now, this is the heyday when the BBC actually had some very literate and cultivated people throughout their organisation, not just on the front line, and produced some of the most brilliant productions. You remember I, Claudius, for example, as another one, and occasionally they would do a small series, let's say ghost stories for Christmas or something, and they were absolutely brilliant, and they were extremely well casted and thought out. And I remember watching that play in 1979 as a young man, and I was so impressed with it. And the cast, for example, had the brilliant Jeremy Kyle. Jeremy Kyle was a very accomplished musician, by the way, but appeared in many things at that time, and he played the role of Gottfried Schalcken. And there were only 5 or 6 important actors in this play, which was directed by Leslie McGahey. And Leslie McGahey really took like 70% of the truth out of very strictly on Le Fanu's original novel. But he did it in a kind of documentary style, so it's almost that people were being filmed as it was really happening. And there was not a huge amount of music or background activity in it, and the cinematography, the way it was filmed, was always with this dark shadow and pastel tones of brown and black and white, and lots of relief in the light, just like a painting from a Dutch master. It was quite brilliantly done. This was also done, for example, The Girl with the Pearl Earrings, where for example, Scarlett Johansson, she played that role very well, and Colin Firth played the role of Vermeer in that recent film that was only like, I don't know, 6-7 years ago, but it was done very much in a similar style. For example, Gerrit Dow was played by Maurice Denham, which was a brilliant character actor of the time, and Van der Hausen of Rotterdam was played by John Justin. John Justin was a kind of leading man in the 40s in British cinema, and a lot on stage. Beautiful deep voice, and he was just perfect to play this rather spooky phantom figure of Van der Hausen of Rotterdam. And Rose Velderkaust was played by Cheryl Kennedy, and she was picked to look like one of Schalcken's model. You'll see it in the book, I'll show you all of that. And that model, I think, was extracted in Le Fanu's novel to be Rose Velderkaust. That name, as far as we know, is fictitious, but we are not entirely sure, because Le Fanu may have found sources that we were not aware of. He did spend some time in The Hague and must have gathered all of his research while he was there. So I was able to get this CD, which is from a company called BFI. If I can find the original link, I will leave it below. But I actually picked this particular copy up in London when I was visiting the British Museum about an exhibition of Gothic horror. And I came out, went into the shop, of course, to look at things, and no intention to buy it, and I saw this, and this was described as a pearl of British drama in Gothic horror. And I was very glad to find it, because I've always been thinking about this. And for your entertainment and pleasure, I've actually found that someone has loaded that up in YouTube. I don't know how long it's going to be around, so it's linked below. Watch it while you can, because it's a very good recording, and it's the whole story of this ghost story as the BBC created it, and it's truly wonderful. Really, it is. Anyway, let's have a look now at this beautiful book. Well, I would just like to show you this fantastic book about Schalcken, his life, and mostly about his paintings. The book is from the Belzer Press, and the Walraff Museum in The Hague in the Netherlands has contributed to this, and the expert there was Dr. Anja Sevcik, and she has brought a number of different experts to comment on the different groups of paintings. I just can only praise this work, because it's been done in such fantastic detail. This is Gerrit Douw, which was his master and teacher, who was also a very famous Feinschilder painter of Leiden, and he was one of the great masters, and he was taught by Rembrandt. So this is the third generation of these Dutch masters, and probably the last great epoch with Schalcken and some of his contemporaries was and he was part of the last epoch with a number of his contemporaries of these very talented painters which controlled light and detail. If you even just look at the lace here around his collar, it's absolutely exquisite, and you see that really with all of the Dutch masters, I think first, second and third generation, although their emphasis point was not always the same in terms of subject matter. Of course, many of them had to live on portrait paintings, just like a photographer today. This is another lovely one from Schalcken with a sort of das Vanderspiel. This is in the London Royal Collection, so the Queen has a good number of Schalckens as well. And you can recognize the artist is sometimes putting himself into these scenes as a figure. But he did many portrait paintings, and this tells you about his stay in London, and the many prominences that he painted, of course, in the Dutch aristocracy. Don't really have time to go through everything, but this is his wife, Francoise van Diemen, and this is Schalcken as a younger man. He's probably somewhere between 35 and 40. And again, look at the wonderful control of light and colour shades and detail here is absolutely exquisite. This is another lovely one, which is again always the darkness around it and some play with the light in this case, but just enough to see this beautiful costume that Schalcken has. And on the other side, this is what they call mezzo tinto, this kind of painting which was very popular in the day, especially in Italy. And the advantage of mezzo tinto is it can be easily reproduced on paper. And he was fascinated that, of course, some of his pictures could be then much more easily printed. And there we have another one, and here the classic again on the inside. And this last one is quite fascinating. This is him and Franziosa, his wife, and one of his daughters. I'm not sure if it's the one who finally survived to carry on the lineage or one of the ones that perished, but this is actually a lovely painting. Some people claim that when he got older he was difficult and rather boorish, but if you look at this picture here, you wouldn't really want to believe that. So, and as the vast majority of his paintings are either in The Hague or in Amsterdam in the Rijksmuseum today. And there's a whole section later in the book about the candlelight paintings, and one after another. This one is quite famous. And there's always often a bit of, in some of them, a little bit of romance put in there as well. This lady is, I think, Rose van der Kalf, who was in the story, the ghost story, although she didn't really exist as a niece of Gerrit Douw. I think this was one of his favourite models before he got married, at least, and it may have been her, but that's a speculation. I don't know for sure. You see this lady in quite a few of his paintings. There you are, another one. So that's my speculation, that that might be the ill-fated Rose who was then seconded by the phantom in the whole story. So I will leave it at that. If you have a chance to get an English version of this, I will leave a link where I got it and some details about any artist that interests you. It's always fascinating to know their history and the breadth of their work, especially if it's been so well researched in great detail as this particular book by Dr. Sevcik. Wonderful. Now, gentlemen, before you go to that attached video, Schalcken the Painter, I have to warn you, there are some scenes of nudity, but it's artistic nudity, so I think it's okay, and I doubt anyone in YTPC will be shocked to see those scenes. But if you are fearing to be shocked, just put your hand up when those scenes come along, or squint, you know, and that won't be so bad. Now, there are some further aspects of Le Fanu's story, which is not only a ghost story, but it's also a tale of greed and ambition, because we see our hero doesn't behave like a romantic hero. He succumbs to pragmatic ambition and prioritization. And some people say that reflects a bit society perhaps in Europe, not only in the Netherlands, where love was bought with gold and marriage was bought with dowries, and everything was rather like a kind of cold business. So these aspects are also entwined, and the nightmare and the horror is partly in the conscience of the players who are involved, both Gerrit Dou and Schalcken. What is intriguing in this story, and will force me to research it further, is the nature of the Phantom and Vanderhausen of Rotterdam. And was this somehow a character that did have some foundation, or is it complete fantasy? But too many things add up. For example, the crypt where some of the scenes are happening in the story, that exists in Rotterdam. And for example, the key painting in this story, which you'll see in the video, doesn't really exist. At least it's not in the collection of the book that I have, which is fairly exhaustive of Schalcken's work. But it is described by Le Fanu in such perfect detail that the BBC could reproduce it. And part of that painting, the girl with a coquettish laugh and the candle, that painting exists. And you wonder, was it part of a larger painting that somehow has been lost, with the girl and this other figure entering the room, which is in fact the arches of the crypt. But not to give too much away, all these mysteries and questions will come to you as you watch the video, and I hope you very much enjoy it as I did. And if we think Le Fanu died at 58, and one literary expert of the time actually said he was suspected to have died of a heart attack from fright. That adds a dimension to this ghost story, that so even the author himself may have been spooked by this phantom. And Schalcken's mysterious death in 1706, and he certainly didn't look ill in the springtime when he finished the beautiful painting for the Palatine, and the only reference to his funeral I could find was in the archives of the state, which financially recorded such funerals, and only stated that it cost 30 guilders in total, which is about $5,000. So, well, a respectable sum for a funeral, but it's rather sad that the brilliance and genius of an artist was gone already at 63, and there's no trace of him apart from his work, which is comforting to all of us who make YouTube videos, isn't it? Well, you all take care, my dears, and I hope you enjoy this Schalcken The Painter ghost story for winter. Look after yourselves. Bye-bye.